what I want to start out with is talking about the Bible. In the 8th century BCE, Israel was having a severe housing crisis. The way we know that is because Isaiah and some of the other prophets were talking about it. This is what Isaiah had to say in the 8th century before Christ. Woe to you who add house to house and field to field until there is room for no one but you, and you are left to live alone in the land. So that basically what he's describing is gentrification, right? That's what we call that today. The wealthy buying up land and houses and moving everybody else out, right? So he's describing gentrification in the 8th century. So this is 2,800 years ago. So gentrification has been around for a long time, or what we today call gentrification. Now in the 21st century of the Common Era, BCE is before the Common Era, or we used to say BC, before Christ. Now the new term for AD is Common Era. And we're in the 21st century of the Common Era. We're having the same problem. Does anybody recognize, does anybody know what this is a picture of right here? This is here in Pasadena. Do you know where in Pasadena this is?
Oh.
Yeah, we don't usually see this part of it. We see the outside. This is the inside of the Paseo, Colorado mall and housing development. So this is a view from the inside that most of us don't ever see. I've only seen it in pictures. I've never been inside. So I put it up here as an example of gentrification. And one thing I want to point out about it is that this was one of the last developments here in Pasadena that was built before we had an inclusionary housing ordinance. And I'll get to what an inclusionary housing ordinance is. Briefly, I'll say the inclusionary part means that you have to include affordable housing. But this was built in the very early 2000s, like 2003 or so, and I think was approved before the first inclusionary ordinance was approved in 2001. I think this was approved before that because it had no affordable housing in it. It's all high-end housing and high-end shops, as you know, with the Paseo, Colorado. And this was one of the things that kind of spurred the city to say we need an inclusionary housing ordinance. So I'll get back to that. A couple of other prophets that raised the alarm so long ago. Micah, and I have to move my picture so I can read this. Okay. Alas, for those who divide wickedness and evil deeds on their beds, when the morning dawns, they perform it. Because it is in their power, they covet fields and seize them, houses and take them away. Again, what Micah is probably describing is some sort of financial predatory activity in relation to the fields and houses. So we see again another 8th century prophet, but it wasn't just in the 8th century. We see a 6th century BCE prophet, and 6th century is 2 centuries later, because when you're in BCE, you're counting backwards, not forwards. So 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. So this is two centuries later. Ezekiel says, "Thus says the Lord God, enough, O princes of Israel, put away violence and oppression and do what is just and right. Cease your evictions of my people, says the Lord God." So he's talking about, there's an eviction crisis going on. Again, this is all the same kind of stuff that we deal with today. They were dealing with in ancient Israel. So was it legal or not legal? That's a question. And it's a question today. Gentrification and other processes that cause housing crises are generally, or at least they're generally understood as legal processes. But that kind of depends on who's interpreting the law. So there were major ancient legal foundations of Israelite law that were being transgressed. So one of them was that God owns the land. This was a major foundation of ancient Israelite law. Human ownership rights, according to ancient Israelite law, are neither absolute nor long-lasting. And this is a major, got to move my pictures again, a major text that expresses that. This is from Leviticus 25. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity. This is God talking. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. With me you are but aliens and tenants. So just think if we had that understanding today in our society, in our law code, that the land belongs to God. It is not ours. It cannot be sold in perpetuity. And therefore, land ownership rights are not absolute. Now, what's interesting is really this kind of depends on how you interpret the law, because there are certain times when suddenly ownership is not absolute. Like when they decide to put a freeway through your neighborhood, then suddenly the government has right to take the land. But at other times, when you need to take care of the least vulnerable, then suddenly land rights start becoming absolute, you know? So a lot of this, even in our society, is how the law is interpreted. This is the same kind of thing they were dealing with in ancient Israel. And just to get into the history of ancient Israel, equal division of the land and equality itself runs deep in the story of Israel in the Bible. So the story of Israel begins with them as the story of them as a nation begins with them as escaped slaves or escaped enslaved people from Egypt going toward their own land of promise, right? So, but they spend time in the wilderness, and during that time, God has to provide for them, right? So there's they're hungry, so they need manna. God provides manna for them, and although we tend to think of this as just another miracle story, it was actually a lesson in equality. It was a socioeconomic lesson, because when they went out to collect the food, no matter how much they collected, no matter how much anyone collected, it says when they got back, no one had too little and no one had too much. Everyone got what they needed. This was a lesson in economic equality. Everyone had the same amount and type of food. So that there was this fundamental, lesson that God was giving them in their desert wandering, which is referred to again in the New Testament. And when they entered the land is equally divided among the tribes and clans and families. There's this equal division of the land. And that's very important. Also, women could be landowners. There's a story about that in Numbers 27. It's under a very special circumstance, but there's a reason that story is included in a very highly patriarchal society. Women could be landowners. So when they entered the land is equally divided among the tribes, clans, and families. And then you get the Sabbath and Jubilee laws. And these laws, we think of Sabbath law as merely about rest on the seventh day, but it was much more than that. There was the Sabbath year, and then there was something called the Super Sabbath, or the Jubilee year. I mean, it wasn't called the Super Sabbath. Some of us call it the Super Sabbath. It's called the Jubilee year. And in the Sabbath year, all debts were forgiven. So every 7 years, all debts were to be forgiven. Just think if we did that today. In the seventh year, all debts in society are forgiven. That would be pretty radical. That was a way of redistributing wealth, to sort of resetting the clock. And then every 49 or 50 years, this is also in Leviticus 25, all land returned to its original owners. This was the Jubilee, the Super Sabbath. This would reset the nation back to its beginning. The idea that in the intervening years, people fell in debt, people lost land, people even sold family members into slavery. This happened in antiquity. And in the Jubilee year, all debt slaves are set free, all land returned to its original owners, all debt was forgiven. Everything was reset back. And this is a way of maintaining Israel as a society of equality. Now, so let me ask you, I'm going to stop right here. Hold your hand up. Had you already heard of the Sabbath year, the forgiveness of debts in the seventh year? Had you already heard of that? Okay, so everybody's holding up their hand. Okay, so you've got that one. Had you already heard of the Jubilee year? Hold up your hand. Okay, keep your hand held up. Okay, everybody heard of the good. So I kind of was wondering about that, but you've heard of the Sabbath and the Jubilee year. Have you heard it said that the Jubilee was never put into practice? Have you heard that? Brita's heard that. Anybody else heard that? Okay, you've heard that. Why do people say that? This is an interesting thing to say because it's not a fact. Nobody knows if it was put into practice or not. And we have plenty of evidence that the Sabbath year was put into practice. We also have evidence that people tried to get around the Sabbath year. It is likely that people tried to get around the Jubilee year too, tried to find loopholes. It's possible it was never practiced, but what is the motivation for people pointing that out? And you can unmute yourself to say something.
Because they don't want to be held accountable or answerable to God for the decisions that we make in this era.
Right. Yeah, it's that is raised as a way of getting around it, right? When we hear that the Jubilee was never put into practice, that's often said as a way of nullifying that part of the Bible. And I have heard people who they say they believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. The whole Bible is the Word of God. But when you bring this up, suddenly that part of the Bible doesn't count because of some notion that we don't even know for sure that the Jubilee was never put into practice. And that's it's interesting because the Jubilee is not forgotten after Leviticus 25. Different biblical writers bring it up. The prophets continue to bring it up, probably because it was being neglected, but they continue to bring it up. And Jesus does. We'll get to that later. Even Ezekiel not only brings it up, but he expands the Jubilee. Ezekiel is writing from the time of the Babylonian exile. So he's imagining a return of Israel to the land. So Israel is in exile in Babylon, and he is imagining this return to the land, and it would be like the first time. The land would be divided up equally, right? It would be a Jubilee. It would be a Jubilee year because they'd be re-entering the land, dividing up equally. And he expands the Jubilee to include the foreigners, the immigrants among them. He says, and this is important because the original law code in Leviticus 25 expressly excludes foreigners. It expressly excludes people who are not Israelite. But Ezekiel expands it. He says, so you shall divide this land among you according to the tribes of Israel. You shall allot it as an inheritance for yourselves and for the aliens who reside among you and have begotten children among you. They shall be to you as citizens of Israel. With you, they shall be allotted an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. In whatever tribe aliens reside, There you shall assign them their inheritance, says the Lord God. So Ezekiel not only remembers and brings up the Jubilee, he actually expands it. Any questions or comments so far before we continue? And am I can be heard pretty well? I'm not glitchy here? Okay, good. All right. All right, so the New Testament. Now it's often, you know, there's often this idea that, okay, well, that's well and good for the Old Testament, but the New Testament sort of nullifies everything in the Old Testament, right? So there's an idea among many Christians. But the New Testament depicts Jesus coming into a situation in which people have been deprived of land and housing. And I like this text, and I'm showing the bottom half of it for a reason. But I like this text because, well, let me read this part of it. Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on." Now, how do we normally, what is it that we take from this text normally? What's the normal teaching that we take from this text? Does anybody want to volunteer?
Oh yeah, I could volunteer this one. That she gave out of her need versus those that gave very little out of their abundance.
Right, so she's sort of an example for us, right? She's an example. This is an example disciple or Christian or whatever. But then we look at what comes before it. If we put it in context, we see this. As he taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses. And for the sake of appearance, say long prayers, they will receive greater condemnation." Then we go to this text where it says that this widow put in the treasury everything she had to live on. Now, part of the problem is that we project our situation onto the first century, because for us, synagogues, churches are religious organizations, and they are, you know, even a temple would be religious to us today, and it's voluntary, right? And contributions are voluntary. However, the treasury we're talking about here at the temple was compulsory. Tithes in ancient Israel were a type of tax. It was not optional. And like a lot of taxes in many societies, even our own, it was regressive. It was harder on the poor. She was forced, in order to comply with the law, she was forced to put in everything she had in order to meet her tax obligation. This is what is actually happening here. And this is why Jesus says they devour widows' houses. This is not, she is not being put up as an exemplar, but rather as an example of somebody being exploited. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is why Jesus, in his inaugural sermon, some of you may already know about this, but he mentions the Jubilee. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord," this is his inaugural sermon in Luke, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." He's quoting Isaiah 61, which was understood to be about the year of Jubilee. The year of the Lord's favor was understood to be the year of Jubilee. And Jesus says, this is why the Spirit of the Lord is on him. This is his inaugural sermon. So however you work that out with, theologically, this was at the center, not peripheral, but justice, equality, land and housing justice was at the center, not just peripheral. Oh, looks like there's 3 people trying to get in. I see a 3. I'm gonna, let's see here. I have to stop screen sharing in order. Brita, are you still with us? Let me see.
Yep, I'm here. They're in.
Oh, they're in? Okay. All
Yeah.
right, great. I'm going to go back to the screen share. Oh, wait a minute. I'm still screen sharing, aren't I?
Yes.
I stopped the, okay. I see. Okay. All right. Are there any questions at this point or comments?
Good.
For that scripture on the widow's mite, I've heard that in the past, being taught as a tithing principle.
Right. Yeah, that it's supposed to be a tithing principle for us. And it's not wrong to tithe. I mean, I believe in that too. Today we live in voluntary society where we have a separation of religion and state, and religion is voluntary. So we need to support our churches, and so I believe in that. But that is not what the story was about. That's not what it was happening in the first century. There was no separation between religion. There was not even an idea of religion as a separate category, like the way we have it today. So it was completely right. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
No, let's jump into it.
Okay. So I work for Making Housing and Community Happen, which was formerly the Greater Pasadena Affordable Housing Group. But we've changed our name. And so we help churches and other faith communities to organize around affordable housing in Pasadena, and we're getting beyond Pasadena now. But there are other organizations that do similar things to what we do. We're very local to Pasadena, and right now I'll get to this, we're getting beyond, but they're like we partner with LA Voice, who works with congregations more at a county and state and federal level. And they're actually broader than just housing. Housing is one of their things, but broader justice. So there are organizations like ours that can help you do the organizing, the community organizing piece. And I just want to get into a couple of our recent successes, just to give you an idea of what we've done. Inclusionary housing. I mentioned this earlier when we looked at the Paseo, Colorado. Inclusionary housing, an inclusionary ordinance is when the city requires a housing developer to include a certain amount of their housing that they're building as affordable. And there is a formula, because it has to be affordable to moderate, low, very low, and sometimes extremely low, depending on how the ordinance is written. There's a formula to figure out what each income category is, and therefore what rent they can charge for that group of that part of the housing. So back when I first got involved with our organization, I work for them now, but I've only been working for our organization now for a little less than a year. But for almost 20 years, I was just another volunteer. I was rallying my church to go down to city council and do these things. And when I first got involved, we were working on an inclusionary ordinance for Pasadena. That was our campaign. Very few cities have them. Very few cities had them 20 years ago. They still very few cities that have them. Los Angeles has never been able to pass one of these. They've got some things we don't have, but we have this that they don't have. That means that since I just got muted.
You had frozen. I was trying to see. I think you're good now.
Okay. Am I glitchy? Do we need to work on that?
You're okay now.
Okay now. Okay. So okay. So in 2001, we got this 10 to 15% inclusionary ordinance passed. So that means that since 2001, 10 to 15%, it depends on how they split it up, how they do it, of every housing development here in Pasadena, whether it's rental or for sale, 10 to 15% has been required to be affordable, or they had to pay an in lieu fee. That in lieu fee has gone into an affordable housing fund that's been used to build several 100% affordable housing developments in Pasadena. So as of about a year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago, this is what we had gained from this inclusionary housing ordinance. 577 inclusionary units and 690 that were built or preserved or rehabbed with the in lieu fee. So that's over 1,200 units of affordable housing from this one ordinance that we passed 19 years ago. Well, we started on it when I got involved in 2000, so it took a while to get it, a year or so to get it passed. So but we passed this, and we got 1,200 units on affordable housing units out of this. Then we did another campaign more recently, an 18-month campaign, and that culminated in August of 2019, so less than a year ago. Last August, we were able to increase the inclusionary housing fee, inclusionary housing ordinance to 20%, and we almost quadrupled the in lieu fee. So now, starting in January, every development that gets approved, now some of these that you're seeing built right now were approved before January, but starting in January, every development that gets approved has to either include 20% of their housing as affordable, or they can build it off-site. They don't have to do it on-site. They can build it off-site somewhere else in Pasadena. It has to be in Pasadena. Or they pay an in lieu fee, which has been quadrupled. Now we are working with groups in Alhambra and Monrovia to do the same thing. So this is now going beyond into Alhambra and Monrovia. This is a step toward Jubilee, toward redistributing income, housing, and land justice. Another thing we did recently, fairly recently, does anybody recognize this building? This is here in Pasadena.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
What do you know the name of this building?
Can't remember.
Okay, where is it?
Is that at Lake and Orange Grove?
Yeah. It is Fair Oaks, right above Orange Grove. Yeah. So Fair Oaks. Yeah, I can see why you might think Lake, but it's on Fair Oaks, right above Orange Grove. This is called Heritage Square North, and it was built with that in lieu fee. Now, the in lieu fee was levied with other state funds. It wasn't just the in lieu fee that built this, because they always use it, and they use it to get other matching funds. But this was a result of having our in lieu fee that we got this built. I can't remember how many units it is, but it's 100% affordable. And some of the people that moved in there were formerly homeless. They didn't have anywhere to live. So this was one example. Now, we did a camp, just south of that, you see the parking lot is just south of that, but just south of that parking lot is an empty lot. And then there's a lot that has Church's Chicken on it. All of that land is owned by the city. And the city acquired all this land with HUD money, Housing and Urban Development. That's the federal housing agency, gave Pasadena money to buy this land with the idea that Pasadena would build affordable housing on it. Well, the city, after building Heritage Square North, was going to sell the rest of the land with this vague promise to buy land somewhere else in the city, some future date. There was no specificity to it at all. So we knew that was going to delay housing indefinitely. And so we did a campaign. We had prayer vigils at that site. Some of us slept over at that site. We flooded city council with emails and with people. And in December of 2018, we got approved Heritage Square South. It's going to be 69 units of permanent supportive housing for seniors who've been experiencing homelessness. So seniors who've been on the street or in shelters, it's going to have 69 units. Permanent supportive housing means it comes with services. Heritage Square North is just housing, but Heritage Square South is going to have services attached to it to make sure people are successful in their housing. So that's what we won. Ground has not broken on it yet. They just actually approved the contract with the affordable housing developer, Bridge Housing, that's going to actually build it. So Church's Chicken is still there right now. It hasn't broken ground, but it will soon, hopefully. Also, what happened the night that we won this, Brita, were you down there at City Council with us the night we won this? Yeah, it was such a euphoric victory that the mayor stood up, or I remember him standing, maybe he didn't stand up, but I remember him declaring next, he wanted to use the YWCA. It's this old building on Marengo that's been sitting empty for over 20 years. He wanted to use the old YWCA for permanent supportive housing. He said the YWCA is next. Now, since then, we have found out that the YWCA is too expensive to renovate for that purpose. But what we've ended up with is another plan. There's this vacant land right next to Centennial Place, the old YMCA. This vacant land right there next to City Council. Looks like there's 4 more people trying to get in. And on that, there is a proposal now that we're backing to build 96 units of affordable housing. Half of it will be for families, half of it will be permanent supportive housing for people who've been homeless. And the proposal is to build that. That's the proposal that we're backing. It's competing with 3 other proposals at this point. There were 10 proposals initially, but it's been cut down to 4. The proposal we're backing is by a developer called National Core to build that 96 units of affordable housing. And the council has already decided that there will be affordable housing on that site. So it told the other 3 developers to come back to redo their proposals and come back with proposals that include affordable housing. And then they're going to choose among the 4 of those. Right now, we're backing the one that's 100% affordable housing. And if any of the other developers can beat that, we'll back that too. We're not married to National Core, but we're going with whoever can have the best affordable housing proposal. So we started our Moral Monday campaign to do this civic center housing. You can see there's some people standing in front of the old YWCA. We're holding our sign. That's before we found out that the YWCA actually can't be renovated for this purpose. But your church participated in our Moral Monday campaign. We did that up until the pandemic, and then we had to stop doing it. Any questions so far? Good. Okay, so how much time do we have left here?
Well, you probably have about 10-ish minutes or so. So.
Okay, let me go through this real quick. I think I can do this in a couple of minutes and we'll have a little discussion. Real quickly, Jesus was organizing. One way to understand the gospel and what Jesus was doing is he was organizing for an egalitarian society. The kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. That is a term that you get, it was that he used. That was central to the teaching. He said the kingdom of God is to come on earth as it is in heaven. So I think of it in one way to think of it is as a new society. So Jesus has, once you begin to see this in the gospel, you see it everywhere. He had all this egalitarian teaching. He said, if anyone wants to be first, he must be last and be the servant of all. You know that the rulers of the nations lord it over them. It will not be so among you, but whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you must be your slave. And I do not no longer call you servants, but friends. There's this egalitarian teaching shot through the gospel. Once you begin to see it, you see it everywhere. These are the first three that I pulled up, one out of each of one of three of the gospels. I didn't even get to Luke. But I want to talk about Jesus as an organizer of a movement. Here you see the map there. Jesus began organizing in the small towns and rural areas of Galilee. See, Galilee is up in the north. His movement, he began organizing among the peasants, the rural working class. It was a campesino movement. There were large cities in Galilee, but we don't hear about them much. Some not at all. Like Sepphoris was a large city. That's not even mentioned in the New Testament because that's where the wealthy lived. But Jesus organized among the peasants. It's pretty much understood within biblical scholarship now that Jesus himself was a peasant, a campesino. So he organized among the peasants. He included the marginalized. So even among the peasant class, there were people who were marginal, who were sort of outcasts. He included them. And he took his movement down to Jerusalem, where he went from margins to center. He took his movement from the rural, poor areas to the center. And then as Jesus was organizing this movement, he met people at point of need, healing and feeding them, right? So even though he's organizing for justice, it's still very relational, and he's meeting them at the point of need. Pasadena Foursquare Church. How is Pasadena Foursquare Church meeting the needs of the community? And I ask this question because I know you're doing it, because I know enough about your church. But I want us to talk about this. How is Pasadena Foursquare Church meeting the needs in the community?
Well, we have the affordable housing units, and then also Wally's Playground is a big way that we are also trying to engage the community of having a play space for people around us to be able to play in and have that area for them.
Right. So right there, affordable housing, you're already doing it, right? You're providing affordable housing. You're doing the playground, which is a collaborative, highly relational thing. Any other ways?
We started thinking in regards to how to look at these kind of things back in the 90s. The question I was asking at that time is, does our community know that our church cares? Mm-hmm. So the second work was, can our church know how to care then? Are we prepared to care? And the third question was, do we have a letter of commendation from the poor? And the fourth question was from Galatians chapter 6, do good to everyone, and especially the household of faith. Those are the four questions I started with. Brita and Dave have taken it farther up and farther in.
Amen. That's great. From a community organizing perspective, I hear two important things in that. One is developing capacity within yourselves, within your own community to care. And two is then demonstrating it, and you send a message. And those are highly important in community organizing, and things that often activists and organizers tend to skip. Your church I would really want to highlight this, that your church is really well positioned to do organizing around structural justice because you've done the first part. Not all churches do. There's more churches out there that do than people realize, but there's a lot of churches that don't do this, and a lot of people in churches that don't do this. So our organization, I'm calling it MHatch. Not everybody in our organization does. It's making housing and community happen. I use the A, but not everybody in our organization does that. Some people say MHCH. Just letting you know, I prefer MHatch. But Jill, our executive director, doesn't necessarily like that one. But anyway, I'm calling this MHatch. MHatch and other organizations help congregations organize. But how can PFC build it on its mercy and relational ministries to address structural justice in Pasadena and beyond? Whether that's working with us or working with some other organization, the important thing is that you're, working, or whether you can do it on your own with your own alliances. How can you build on what you've already done? You've done some important relational work. How can you build on that to address structural justice?
I think one of the things that stands out to me on that is like what you said specifically. I see us at this time really needing that kind of partnership and different kind of alliances. And I think GPOG and now MHatch has been a way. So I know, like, looking at a liaison, Chase Stafford has said he's interested in looking. But I think actually what we do best is when we do things in teams and develop a group of people that would say, hey, we want to be a part of this core team to develop how does PFC continue to structurally grow in this way? How do we even look at in terms of our land and our community center, No Future Cafe? How do we continue, especially in this time of COVID, to not be on hold, but actually consider the ways that we are to actually sort of be motivated to find new creativity and new adaptive change at this time. I think it's an important time for us. And so, yeah, I think one of those things is definitely making sure that we don't minimize what we do, but that we see it, and that we continue to recognize that if we can partner with other organizations, and also like what you mentioned about Jubilee and land distribution, that's so key, because like that's actually what we're doing. And anytime we're involved in City Hall, or anytime we're writing letters, or anytime we're going to our neighbors, that if we actually recognize it like we're tying and tapping into that justice of heaven, I think that's a really key component to getting more people involved. So that's some of the things that are coming up for me.
Yeah, and you said whenever we're down at City Hall and writing letters, how much experience does the church have in doing those things?
I would say probably it's hit and miss, as far as there are some people that know how to do it. But I think as a whole, that would be a new, and that's part of like getting the liaison with MHatch, because actually that's something that I think as a whole would be great to be trained in. How would you stand and speak to city council? Or what does writing a letter campaign kind of mean? Or what is the effectiveness of having conversations like this Tuesday, right? We're on the phone call with our city councilwoman, Margaret McCostin, and wanting others to join. So I think as a whole, that's an area that I'm hoping, even like within this grouping, hey, if even a core group of us learned and we were a part of that, then when there were things that came up, we'd be ready to be a part of, because actually this is bringing some pretty massive change into Pasadena. And rather than just move away, hey, we're here, so let's dig in and let's stand for this. Yeah.
Exactly. Does everybody know what you're talking about? You just referred to our meeting on Tuesday with Margaret.
No, not everybody does.
But let me explain that real quickly.
We probably have about 5 minutes, so we probably should wrap it up, just to let you know.
Okay. I do want to mention that we have a proposal before the city to change zoning for churches. There are 7 churches in Pasadena that want to build affordable housing on their property, but the zoning is not right. Either it's not zoned for housing at all, or the density is too low, because you need at least 30, 40 units for an affordable housing project to pencil out. So we have proposed a very detailed, very nuanced proposal to change zoning for churches across the city. It's neighborhood specific, so developments will blend into the neighborhood, but it will allow churches to build affordable housing. So we're meeting with each of the city council reps. The city council rep for the area of Pasadena that your church meets in is Margaret McGostin. So we have an appointment with her at 11 o'clock?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
11 o'clock on Tuesday. And Brita set that up, by the way. She's the one that set that up. And she's been helping organize churches. So as many people as we can get on the call from the church, that would be excellent, because there's actually not a lot of churches in your district. Or at least the ones that aren't responding to us, so we don't have that much. So we need as many people from PFC on that call on Tuesday at 11 as possible. One of the things that I wanted to think about that Brita or David or somebody had suggested is having people at city council, and this was easier before the pandemic, because now it's not, the way we testify at city council is now online, and you don't always get to read your own thing. Sometimes you submit a comment and it's read for you, but we can still do it. It'd be more powerful when we can actually meet in person. But to have people from your church come and talk about what your church is doing. Could be some of the people that live in your housing to tell their story about being housed. And we've done this with at least one other church, maybe more, that is doing something like what you're doing. And when they come up and they say it, they talk about, this is what we're doing, but it's not enough. There's still a lot of need out there. It really motivates people. And you can tell it moves the city council. And more importantly, it moves the people in the room and the people that are listening. Because it's that testimony of people that are practicing what they preach, doing, living what they believe. And that really has a way of animating and inspiring the larger community to step up and do what needs to be done to house all of our neighbors. So I think your witness at Pasadena Foursquare is going to be huge. And I hope we bring that up with McCostin.
Yeah.
I hope we have some time for that. I want to make sure we do. Because your witness is huge in that respect. So that was one of the ways I was thinking, but maybe quickly before we leave, there might be some other ways that you all are thinking that build on what you've done.
I would mention the historical fact of when we first got the properties back in '93, the choice I made was with the church council at that time was to always keep affordable housing. The great thing about it was from the '90s on, there are stories of people who benefited from that, who had literally nothing. And we put them up in housing that was extremely affordable. And even at times never even had them pay rent. And never asked them to come to church. We never did that business. So we just took care of people. And just recently at a funeral, I heard one of them speak. And afterwards it came up and thanked me again for allowing their family to live there. And so not only do you have what Dave and Brita have done, but you have a historical setting. And then No Future Cafe, which we started in '94, we have the history of being a benefit to the community without asking anything in return. So by acts of kindness, God reaches people. So let's join in kindness towards them. So philosophically, they took that, and again, they've taken it farther up and farther in. So you have a history in this situation of years.
Yes, that history is a witness.
Yeah.
It's going to be, it can be a powerful witness to the city and to the community that will, I think, energize people. I think that's a huge part of your strength. I don't know of any other churches actually that have done it quite the way you've done it. Uh, you're not only providing housing, it's also extremely relational, and you've done the playground as well. So I think you've done the work, you've done the groundwork of proving that you care. And so your church is going to have great moral authority to speak to the community and to speak to the council. Because we don't just speak to the council, we speak to the community. We need to animate everyone to care and to animate spiritual and moral transformation throughout the community. Yeah. So anyway, unless anyone has some final words, we can wrap it up right there.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you, Bert, for being on and leading this. I think there is a wealth of areas that you've covered, not just biblically, but to really consider the way that all of these actions not only are tied to something that is right and good in community, but actually it's a very biblical heart of God. And that's a really important thing that we recognize and that we know. And that sense of the land is the Lord's and the redistribution, I know is key to our heart, that this land and this property is representative, but it's all the homes and the lands that we live on as well, that our lives are meant to be opening and not closing off access for people. So I just want to say thank you. And I know we've scratched the surface. I hope that we can continue this conversation at another point, because I think that there's a lot of great things that we could get into discussions and go further into. But you've given us, I think, a lot to be able to move with. And I'll just say two things. Number one, I'll be sending out an email and a link with everybody on this call to say, if you can jump on that call on Tuesday, here's a chance to be on a phone call with a city council person and be able to actively speak on behalf of these things. Please join. It's an hour call because, we've got her time. Those who are part of this overlay zone, they're going to be doing a presentation, but then we're really sharing and encouraging our councilwoman toward this. And then I would just say, finally, just on a basic thing for PFC, 12:30 to 2, we're doing our PFC communion caravan, and we will have packets of communion. We have cards that we have prayed and written scriptures and speak blessing over you. We invite you to drive through, and we want to hand this to you. And again, how can we continue to remain in community so that we can continue to be people of mercy, of kindness, of justice? We have to be in relationship too. So just wanted to give a big thank you to everybody for being on the call, and especially to Bert. So if we all just want to say thank you to him. Yay, thank you.
Thank you.
Still.
Can I just say on Tuesday, just keep this in mind as a motivation. If we are successful in all our efforts to get the overlay zone and to work with those 7 churches, that could mean 7 new affordable housing developments in the next few years.
That's awesome.
From this one initiative.
Awesome. Yeah, this is real change. So when we talk about change, we literally could enact effective change here in the city. And there is funds for this, and there are churches ready to go. So we want to show our support. So thank you, Bert. I'm sure we'll be in touch and some follow up on that. But have a great day, and we'll see everybody. Thanks.